we should be patient because transition takes time. We should make sure that respecting minorities and especially religious communities and building consensus are key components of Egypt's democracy. The same applies, of course, for human rights. The Constitution has to be the result of the broadest national agreement. This is exactly the message that the European Union is conveying to our Egyptian counterparts. Let us keep working. At the very moment we are speaking in this debate, new proposals for dialogue are being discussed. As Ms. Sargentini has said, it is not about megaphone diplomacy. But being discreet does not mean not being clear and strong in our messages. In order to show in a pragmatic manner that the European Union supports Egypt's democratic transition, the EU-Egypt Task Force, as I have mentioned, was organised on 13 and 14 November, putting all our support measures on the table: investments, tourism, mobility exchanges, and of course financial support in the form of grants and concessional loans. The recent political turmoil cannot overshadow the success of this task force. Through this new contract with Egypt, the European Union is in a unique position to help Egypt abiding by values and principles. And in the current situation, there is need for even more engagement with the European Union. Let me conclude by repeating that democratic transition is a long process and requires hard work, commitment, stamina, as well as patience. The European Union will continue to support the Egyptian people in this difficult transition period with determination and persistence for the prevalence of democracy, human rights, the rule of law and good governance. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Madam Kojako Markoulis. Ezzel a vitát lezár.
That concludes the debate. And the next item on our agenda is also where we shall hear from the Vice President of the Commission and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. This time around, we're talking about the Israeli government's decision to expand the settlements in the West Bank. That is the next subject matter on our agenda. And once again, I would like to turn to Council, if I may. Mrs. Markoulis, I would like you to give your statement before the House, because you're representing, I understand, the High Representative on this occasion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honourable members, as you will have seen, on Monday, the Foreign Affairs Council issued conclusions on the Middle East peace process. No one can have any doubts about the European Union's position on this crucial issue. This is clear both in this week's Council conclusions but also in the declaration on behalf of the European Union issued on the 29th of November. The resumption of direct Israeli-Palestinian negotiations without delay or preconditions is what the EU wishes now to see. Clearly, this will require bold and concrete steps by both parties. But now, more than ever, direct and substantial negotiations are needed to achieve a lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, ending all claims. Clear parameters outlining the basis for negotiations are key elements for a successful outcome. The European Union is ready to work with the United States and other international partners, including within the Quartet, with the common aim of substantive peace efforts in 2013. The European Union will also work with all those who are willing to join in such a quest for peace, stability and prosperity. The Arab Peace Initiative, in particular, provides regional support for a comprehensive Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement. All parties must avoid acts which undermine confidence and the viability of a two-state solution. Since the 1980 Venice Declaration, the European Union has held that settlements are illegal under international law and constitute an obstacle to peace. It should therefore come as no surprise that on Monday the European Union expressed its deep dismay and strong opposition to Israeli plans announced after the UN General Assembly resolution of 29 November to expand settlements in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem, and in particular plans to develop the so-called E1 area. The E1 plan, if implemented, would seriously undermine the prospects of a negotiated resolution of the conflict by jeopardizing the possibility of a contiguous and viable Palestinian state and of Jerusalem as the future capital of two states. The European Union stated that it would closely monitor the situation and its broader implications and act accordingly. In other words, the European Union has never been clearer than it was on Monday. Implementation of such plans would not only have an impact on the prospects of a Palestinian state, it would also have an impact on EU-Israel relations. In the same spirit, the EU expressed its commitment to ensure that, in line with international law, all agreements between the State of Israel and the European Union must unequivocally and explicitly indicate their inapplicability to the territories occupied by Israel in 1967. It also reiterated its commitment to ensure continued, full and effective implementation of existing EU legislation and bilateral arrangements applicable to settlement products. The European Union also called on Israel to avoid any step undermining the financial situation of the Palestinian Authority. Contractual obligations, notably under the Paris Protocol, regarding full, timely, predictable and transparent transfer of tax and custom revenues have to be respected. Finally, the European Union called on the Palestinian leadership to use constructively the new status of non-member observer state granted to Palestine in the United Nations, and not to undertake steps which would deepen the lack of trust and lead further away from a negotiated solution. Honourable members, just 3 weeks ago we discussed the latest hostilities between Gaza and Israel, which ended with a ceasefire later that night. Monday was also the first opportunity for the Foreign Affairs Council to take stock of the ceasefire and discuss potential EU support to ensure it is sustainable. The ceasefire has held well so far. It is vital that all parts of the ceasefire agreement continue to be implemented. The European Union is committed to facilitating the social and economic development of the Gaza Strip. Equally, the issue of smuggling of weapons into Gaza must be immediately and effectively addressed. Fully recognizing Israel's...
Little bit, there is some problem with the translation. Not all the languages are working. What is your language? No French.
No, but no,
Somebody...
it is working now. It works now, French.
It works now, as I am informed, so excuse me, madam, but please continue.
Ça a été coupé pendant un long moment.
It was cut off for quite a long time, Mr. President. We didn't really hear the whole of the last section.
Okay. Fully recognizing Israel's legitimate security needs, the European Union reiterates its call for the immediate, sustained and unconditional opening of crossings for the flow of humanitarian aid, commercial goods and persons to and from the Gaza Strip. We have expressed our readiness to make use of its instruments in support of the parties' efforts, including the possible reactivation in the appropriate way of the EU-BAM Rafah mission. The European Union has repeatedly reiterated its fundamental commitment to the security of Israel, including with regards to vital threats in the region. The European Union will never stop opposing those who embrace and promote terrorism and violence. The European Union has repeatedly reiterated its call for intra-Palestinian reconciliation behind President Mahmoud Abbas, in line with the principles set out in his speech of 4 May 2011 as an important element of the unity of a future Palestinian state and for reaching a two-state solution. Such reconciliation would also have a direct impact on the situation in Gaza, which is unsustainable as long as it remains politically and economically separated from the West Bank. I thank you for your attention and look forward to the resolution that this European Parliament will adopt tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker in the name of the European People's Party is Mr. Gahler. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, President. We take note of the fact that currently in the Middle East conflict, on both sides, unfortunately, it's the hawks that have gained the upper hand. We are trying to premise ourselves upon an international statement concerning two viable states. The solution to the Middle East conflict is not just in the interest of those who are there, it is in the direct interest also of the European Union. Therefore, we need to not just react to situations or events and make declarations, we need to do everything that we can that can help us in this peace process. For instance, on the Palestinian side, we need to make sure that there are no longer any attacks on the Gaza Strip, and we also need to look at the whole issue of the recognition of the State of Israel. Now, for me, as a friend of the State of Israel and of the people of Israel, I'm concerned about its existence. Of course, it has a right to existence as a Jewish state, and it's very painful for me to see, however, what the Israeli government is doing, because the government is creating the impression that it doesn't care about international commitments. It pays lip service to these things, but does not really seem to make much of a contribution to the peace process. The whole issue of settlements, unfortunately, is blocking the peace process. Settlements are not lawful, that is our legal conviction, and therefore we would call for an immediate stop to settlement activities, immediately. We need to make it quite clear where we stand, and I would like to thank the Presidency in office for its statement, and thank you also for talking about the whole issue of customs levies and the Palestinian Authority. I think it's important for us to say clearly what we expect expect from both sides, from the Israeli government and from the other side, and when we expect this, and what kind of measures we will adopt if these things do not happen. I think the Israeli government should ask itself the question, why is it that it was just one member state of the European Union that actually voted against the recognition of Palestine as an observer state with the United Nations? I think it needs to take note of the EU position. I think we need to also ensure that when it comes to the occupied areas, that people are not actually making some kind of profit on the basis of what's happening there. For instance, high schools. In Ariel, you have certain privileges thanks to the cooperation between EU and Israel in the research area, but they should not benefit from that. I think that these are specific aspects that we can take into account, and I believe that Israel too will have to take note of these in good time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Galler. Are you ready to answer a blue card? Mr. Murphy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Could I ask the member whether he voted in favour of upgrading trade relations with Israel 2 months ago in relation to the ACCA agreement? Does he think just words are enough, words of criticism by this Parliament, or should something actually be done for once?
With regard to the ACCA, I didn't consider that an upgrade. That was a continuation of existing things. That was definitely not an upgrade, so I voted in favour. And I agree. Well, this Parliament is not the executive. I am calling on the Council, I am calling on the Commission, I am calling on the Member States to act accordingly what I said. So they set benchmarks, set a timeline, make concrete suggestions or demands, and if nothing happens, then let's react towards be it the Palestinians or the Israelis. I'm really unhappy that the current government is not really seeing the future of its country in the right perspective, I have to say, and that is a harsh statement, I'm aware of that, but I'm sadly saying that.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker on my list on behalf of the Socialists and Democrats is Mrs. Ana Gomez.
What's going on in Israel and the settlements in the West Bank is against international law, but the recent announcement to build more than 3,000 more settlements in the West Bank is a terrible provocation to the Palestine Authority, and it's a real defeat that Israel is inflicting upon itself, because it makes statements of peace, but the only way of ensuring the security that Israel wants is cooperation with the Palestine Authority, and the state has to be responsible and cooperative. I think if Israel acts through the UN and through cooperation with the Palestine Authority, then this must also involve cooperation with the EU, and the announced imposition of taxes on products is also another provocation to the situation. The European Union has to give out a clear message as well that to Hamas that Israel is a fact and it is there to stay. The recent inflammatory announcements have not helped, and they do not help the people of the Palestine Authority in building their own state next to Israel.
Thank you very much. And now on behalf of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats, Mrs. Nates, please.
Minister, Mr. President, Mr. Commissioner, dear colleagues, when we started preparing our various drafts for today's resolution, we did not know yet the conclusions of your Council meeting that took place Monday. Nevertheless, when you compare even the initial texts and the text of the Council conclusion, you will see remarkable parallels in our various approaches. We do, of course, very much regret the announcements made by the Israeli government of building 3,000 extra housing units and further developing the plans in area E1, which, if ever implemented, would effectively make a contiguous state of Palestine territorially impossible. We do regret the decision to withhold taxes. Especially both of these decisions and announcements have come days after the vote in the General Assembly of the United Nations, and it seems to us that by these announcements actually the Israeli government is undermining the legitimacy of Mahmoud Abbas, and by ricochet such an undermining of his legitimacy can only reinforce the status of Hamas, which from the point of view of Israel is kind of a paradoxical attitude. We have welcomed, and I do welcome, the conclusions, as I said, of the Council of Ministers, and I believe that the High Representative and her team have played an important role, a discreet one, but an important role in coming to these conclusions. We should not forget that these conclusions have been approved unanimously by all the 27 member states. And this is something that the Israeli government should carefully ponder and consider, as they should carefully analyze the vote that intervened in the United Nations General Assembly. It is significant, as my colleague Gahler said, that only one single EU member state chose the side of Israel, so to say, and the other ones either approved the Palestinian bids or abstained. If the government of Israel continues to act as they do, they might end up completely isolated, and that would be a pity, because it will make the search for a lasting solution ever more difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, on behalf of the Greens European Free Alliance, for a minute and a half, I give the floor to Mrs. Brantner.
Thank you, and welcome, Madame la Ministre. The advancement of plans to expand settlements in the West Bank, including the E1 zone, is both legally unacceptable and politically offensive, making a future Palestinian state unviable. But let me also mention another thing that happened yesterday morning. The Israeli army attacked offices of 3 Palestinian organizations, the Women's Union, the Palestinian NGO Network and Adamer, as well as the Umbrella Organization for Palestinian NGOs. Many of them are actually supported by European foundations or organizations, and I believe it doesn't only constitute a threat to the peace in the region, but it's a clear, really, breach of international law, and it will harm the promotion of human rights in both countries. And the EU is currently extending its cooperation with Israel, as decided at the last EU-Israel Association Council in July, with up to 60 concrete activities. I demand that any implementation of such new areas of cooperation be frozen for the time being, as a signal to the current Israeli government that the EU does not accept Israel's latest breaches of international obligations. I furthermore ask the High Representative to consider withdrawing the head of the delegation to Israel in Tel Aviv, to send a strong signal to our Israeli counterparts that the EU follows words with actions. And the EU needs to be more clear and have actions also on the illegal settlement products, and to have a proper labelling. This is not against Israelis, let me be clear. It's a reaction to the policies of the current government. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, on behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformists, I call Mr. Tannock.
He sympathises with Palestinian frustrations. Their successful effort to win observer state status at the UN provokes justifiable anger in the eyes of the Israeli government, who have offered much evidence to support their claims of a material breach now of the 1993 Oslo peace accords. Nevertheless, the Israeli response, in my view, was counterproductive. My group, the ECR, has consistently opposed the construction of new settlements, the expansion obviously being an obstacle to lasting peace and a viable two-state solution, and the latest Israeli announcements has not helped their cause. Nevertheless, it is vital to point out, in Israel's favour, that the much-discussed E1 corridor is in a preliminary planning phase, and the government did not announce any imminent construction work. They have also provided a robust defence for withholding Palestinian Authority funds in order to pay Israeli companies, particularly the electricity company, owed a lot of money. This situation now, however, must be de-escalated before it becomes a full-blown crisis. We ask both the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority to display courage, humility and wise heads, and to return to the negotiating table without delay in order to have a two-state solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, on behalf of Europe of Freedom and Democracy, I would like to call Mr. Provera for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I remember that in the Oslo agreements, all the contentious issues, especially those on settlements, should have been agreed upon in direct negotiations between the parties. The question of settlements is not the sole cause of the conflict, because the attacks against Israel started over 50 years ago, precisely in that area, when we didn't have any settlements on Palestinian territory. The refusal at the moment by the Palestinian authorities and the terrorists of Hamas and most of the Arab countries to actually recognize the legitimacy of Israel to exist as a Hebrew state, without really recognizing that it's not just a territorial issue, it's a question of legitimacy. If you don't reach that conclusion, you will never get a lasting peace. On the question of territories and settlements, it would be interesting to organize a hearing to get experts or jurists from the two parties to explain their two positions, so that I think we would have more information on the background, the historic legal background of this particular Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Thank you very much. And now, on behalf of the European United Left and the Nordic Green Left, I call Mr. Le Yarrick. Thank you very much, President. Minister, the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas are using the tools of international law and diplomacy. The Israeli government once again has chosen to opt for force, for violence and a deliberate breach of international law. Our institutions, Parliament, Commission and Council, can no longer tolerate this. A situation where a government and a state with whom we have an association agreement, I'm referring to the Israeli government, where it unilaterally decides to take reprisals against a very broad majority decision of the General Assembly on the 29th of November of the United Nations, which recognized Palestine as an observer state. Our European institutions really should help implement international legislation and should therefore stand up against the decision taken by the Israeli government to, for instance, confiscate import duties levied by Palestine, building of houses in East Jerusalem, settlements, and it should restitute stolen land. Now, the settlement issues, particularly in the E1 zones, restarting these settlements would mean that the Palestinian state could no longer build its state, and it would be a way of really denying the vote adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. We should stand up and say that West Bank, Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip form part of Palestine. And the Israeli state is guilty because it has acted in a way that completely reneges the signature that it actually appended to the Geneva Convention back in 1951. Let me remind you that Article 49 of that Geneva Treaty says that there shall be no settlement of a new population on a territory that has been acquired through conflict. It says that the occupying force cannot go ahead with the deportation or the transfer of a part of its own population, its civilian population, to the territory that has been occupied by the former. Israel signed that agreement, and we should therefore make sure that Israel respects that text. And that is why my group, the European United Left and the Nordic Green Left, would like to support the joint motion for a resolution which speaks about the spirit of justice, the spirit of law, against the opposite trend of domination and force. Thank you very much, says the President. We now move on to the following speakers. On their own behalf, Mr. Pittering.
Presidency of Council, Commissioner, dear colleagues, peace in the Middle East is important strategically for Europe and for the world, and the peace process in the Middle East needs to be a priority for the European Union. It's important for these people to live in peace. The Federal Republic of Germany has said that Israel has a right to live in peace, and I can echo those words. Ralek Mashal, the leader of Hamas, has said repeatedly that they will not recognize the Israeli state. That's one side of the argument, but the Palestine Authority also has the right to live in peace, and with the announcement of 3,000 additional housing units being built, this is Israel taking something which does not belong to it. And the reasoning that is given is that Palestine is not recognized by the UN, and now in the light of its recognition as a non-member state, this changes. So this planned settlement is an affront against the wishes of the majority of the UN. That means that the settlement should no longer be possible, and this kind of policy cannot be continued by Israel. We are friends to Israel, and we need to speak out for the truth. Friendship does not mean that we simply support people unconditionally. It means that we stop our friends going along the wrong path, and we need to express that opinion clearly. Our common friendship should not allow us to let the two-state solution fail because of the announced settlements. President Abbas and Fayyad have said that they want peace. They've said that when I've met them personally, and as such the role of President Abbas is to be recognized, and that's something that is stated in the declaration. In terms of the problems with Hamas, this is true, but there needs to be a two-state solution. So we call upon Israel and the Palestine Authority to choose the path of negotiations. We recognize the dignity of people in Israel and the people in Palestine. Peace is possible. The EU, having been awarded the Peace Prize, shows that peace is possible, and the peace process in the Middle East is important to everybody involved. It's important, that's why we support it.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mrs. Costello for a minute and a half.
President, last month as we debated the situation in Gaza, there was a collective sigh of relief here when it was announced that there was a ceasefire. We expressed here our strong support for the Palestinian bid for UN non-member state observer status. And following that strong UN vote, it was hoped that it would provide an impetus for the resumption of peace talks. But the Israeli government's decision to retaliate with plans for 3,000 new illegal settlement units in the West Bank and East Jerusalem poses a real and immediate barrier to peace and is to be utterly condemned. This plan would completely destroy the two-state solution repeatedly endorsed by the EU and the international community. Moreover, withholding of taxes due to the Palestinian Authority serves only to undermine the authority and position of President Abbas, who has constantly advocated non-violence means. What is needed is clear. There should be an immediate and complete freeze of all settlement, construction and expansion activities, an end to evictions and house demolitions, the terms of the ceasefire to be fully implemented, the Gaza blockade lifted. Progress is also needed on the internal Palestinian reconciliation, but most importantly there is a need for a resumption of the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations without preconditions. While I welcome Monday's Council conclusions calling for bold and concrete steps towards peace, EU member states must be prepared to take those bold and concrete actions. We must be visible, we must be strong, we must implement existing EU legislation and uphold international law. Otherwise, I fear that our fine words and resolutions will be dismissed as just restatements of the usual platitudes. Strong words need to be backed up by strong actions.
Thank you very much. There is a blue card to you. Are you ready to answer? Ms. Sinclaire, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would congratulate my colleague on her speech. It's very strong and meaningful. But she talks about the peace process. Wouldn't she agree with me that one of the main barriers to the peace process is that Hamas's refusal to recognise the State of Israel? And she failed to mention that at all. And that is really the first step towards a peace and a two-state solution in this matter. So I invite her to call on Hamas to recognise the State of Israel.
Thank you, and I thank my colleague for her question. I have always supported the EU position of the Palestinians' right to statehood, while at the same time Israel has the right to live securely and freely within their borders. And I would hope, and I call on the Palestinian reconciliation process to take account of that, and that we will see both Palestinian reconciliation and the resumption of peace talks with the Israelis without preconditions.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mrs. Auken for 1 minute.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I think there's just one thing we need to underscore very clearly today, is that something needs to be done. Under point 3 of the declaration, a very good declaration, the Monday's declaration, we state that we're going to be acting accordingly. And we talked a lot about this, but very little is being done in terms of action. And the Israeli government is not at all interested in what it hears from the European Union. We say what the Union is doing, and it's comparable to the Holocaust when we criticize Hamas. And I'm the first one to criticize Hamas. We must, however, remember that our partners are going much too far. It is an affront against ourselves and also the victims of the Holocaust. You can do a lot of things, and I'm not going to mention them all, but we need to go beyond words, and we need to act, because if not, things are going to go very badly. Our friends in Israel are asking for us to act. Many people in Israel understand that the only solution is a solution which makes it possible for us to find a tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Van Orden next.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, the Israeli announcement, of course, was a most regrettable, unhelpful but not wholly unexpected reaction to the unilateral action in the UN General Assembly on statehood by the Palestine Authority. That action, of course, flew in the face of the Oslo agreements on a negotiated solution. I don't remember any resolution of this Parliament condemning it. I'm sure many of us have expressed our deep concern and extreme frustration to the Israelis that they should act in the way that they have. We know that the security situation and the pressure of the elections early in the new year leads to statements and actions which wouldn't be contemplated in calmer times. Whether or not there is any construction on the E1 site, and I doubt that there will be, is really not the point. My concern is that the Israeli announcement distracts attention from the real problems in the region. With Gaza as a cauldron for terrorism, Palestine Authority area remains divided, with Mahmoud Abbas currently having no say in Gaza, and he's absent from negotiations. And there's a question mark over the extent of Hamas penetration of the West Bank, and Hamas ally now in power in Egypt. Are we now to start thinking about a three-state solution, I wonder? And now of course, Mr. Chairman, has taken off the Iran threat. May I just conclude by saying, what might the EU usefully do? Perhaps act where it has real leverage. Realistically, that means with the Palestinians. We've given over $5 billion in aid, and I wonder what return there is on this investment. They need to come back to the conference table, and we should encourage them to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. You had almost 2 minutes, but still has a possibility to speak, for there is a blue card from Ms. Auken. Are you ready to answer? Yes, please.
It's just because, Mr. Van Orden, I didn't believe my ears. Did you say that this Parliament should condemn the call for the UN bid? Should we not be in favour of the most multinational, the most established rule of law we have in this world? Should this Parliament condemn?
Astonished by a lot of the things I hear in this Parliament, I have to say, Mr. Chairman. Of course, in this case, the Palestinian action was deliberately politically provocative. It was unhelpful. It flies in the face of the Oslo agreements. We need a negotiated settlement. How is this helpful? How is this helpful? Right? We need to get back to the conference table on a proper... We need to exert pressure on the Palestinians to do just that. The sort of stuff that we're hearing from here merely encourages them in an entirely different direction.
The next speaker is Mrs. Anderson. For 1 minute, please.
Thank you. The Israeli government's decision to expand the illegal settlements in the West Bank is a blatant retaliation against the Palestinian people after their recent success in the United Nations. This act of aggression, which continues that government's disregard for international law, must be condemned at the highest level. In addition to this, the decision of the Israeli government to withhold Palestinian tax revenues to the sum of $100 million only serves to disrupt the peace negotiations and endanger the fragile stability in the region. Any genuine solution to the crisis will only be born out of mutual respect. The EU's relations with Israel must be conditional on their respect for international humanitarian law. Therefore, I urge the Council and the Commission to freeze any upgrading in relations until the situation shows tangible improvements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marek Siewicz is the next speaker.
Dziękuję bardzo. Ja zgadzam się, tak, nie podoba mi się osadnictwo.
Thank you very much. I agree that I don't like the settlements on the West Bank. I don't like unilateral action, but this is part of politics, which in the Middle East is unilateral since some time, both from the Israeli and the Palestinian side. It's a time of confrontation. Israel is using its means, although they are extra-legal. I know that from firing a rocket and announcing alarm, there is 30 seconds for people to hide. A mother with 3 kids has to decide which kids to take with her, otherwise they may all be killed by the rocket. So those who condemn the settlements must remember that there are 2 sides to this conflict, and we must separate what and identify what really deserves to be condemned. If there will be dialogue, there will be progress. Today there is no dialogue, no conditions for dialogue, and the cause is that Israel is exposed to specific attack with specific arms, and its citizens are vulnerable.
Thank you very much. And now the next speaker is Mrs. Muniz.
Thank you, President. I'd like to thank the Council for the firm and resilient conclusions it has adopted on the decisions made by Israel to extend its settlements. We condemn the plan to extend settlements in the E1 region and the way in which this will break the unity of the Palestine territory, and the fact that it will displace several thousands of Bedouins from the region. The European projects and infrastructures that have been funded in this region, particularly solar plants, are also at risk because of the planned expansion in Palestine territory, particularly regarding urban structures. In order to ensure consistency in EU external action, all agreements between the EU and Israel should unequivocally and explicitly say that they cannot be applied to the the 1967 occupied territories. the Council conclusions and the European Parliament's resolution states quite clearly its position, but we stand by the people of Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I call Mr. Arlacchi.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, the Israeli government's announcement that in response to the UN vote on Palestinian statehood it is to expand settlements in the West Bank sends the message that it has no respect for human rights and international law. Settlement construction is the cause of forced displacement and of a myriad of human rights violations. In addition, this new plan for settlements in the E1 area could bisect the occupied West Bank, potentially cutting Palestinians off from Jerusalem and further reducing their hopes for a contiguous state. We must remind that Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention prohibits an occupying power from transferring its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. For this reason, I endorse the Council statement, important statement, of last Monday, according to which all EU agreements with Israel must unequivocally and explicitly indicate their inapplicability to the territories occupied by Israel in 1967, namely the Golan Heights, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mr. Cofferati.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Once again, I must say that I'm a bit surprised by the way, the turn of this debate and the most recent debates that we've had in the Parliament on the relationship between Israel and Palestine. We're in favour of peace, and we've always said this quite clearly. We've always explained our objectives. We've always had respect for the state of Israel. We know how often it has been a subject of aggression, of violent acts in the light of the state and its citizens. But when you call into question the precarious relationship and fragile relationship as it exists, I mean, we should not hesitate. We need to be very clear on our objectives. We need to condemn any of these attacks that we've been discussing. I don't think that any type of hesitation is going to help us reach peace.
Thank you very much. And now I call Mrs. Miranda.
Obrigada, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Congratulations to Palestine for its new status as non-member observer state in the UN. The announcements of Israel to expand its settlements is international blackmail. The Israeli settlements in Palestine territory are illegal and immoral. The checkpoints, the controls, the borders, shameful walls that are being set up, these illegal businesses going on, and the terrorization of people in this region, all in the name of security. Israel once again is going well beyond the limits. Ladies and gentlemen, this cannot be an excuse, this idea that it's all to create security. This is irresponsible activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I now call Mr. Angourakis.
Η καταψήφιση και η αποχή κρατών μελών της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης.
The abstention of the EU member states to recognize Palestine as an observer is proof of the imperialist character of the policy and the plans of the European Union, the US, NATO, Israel against Palestinians and the peoples of the region. Israel intensifies its aggressiveness with the 3,000 housing units and in an effort to establish Israelis in a new zone as a response to the UN resolution. It is high time to express our solidarity to the Palestinian people for a viable independent Palestinian state in the borders of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. Stop the creation of new housing units in the Golan Heights, in the southern Lebanon and elsewhere. Israeli occupants should leave the occupied Palestinian territories. Let's strive for the liberation of all Palestinians and the return of all refugees as requested by the UN.
Thank you very much. Ivo Weigel is the next speaker.
Moram reči, da verjetno takšne razprave niso primeren čas niti primerno mesto.
Thank you very much. I suppose that this isn't really the time and place for a personal statement, but nevertheless, if I may, I would like to make a personal statement in the context of this debate. Recently I have visited Israel, in fact on several occasions, and every time I was able to set out my position, which is that I want to be friends with both sides. I would even be prepared to act as a go-between, as a mediator. I would be prepared to show signs of goodwill on either side and pass that on to the other side. I think that one of the main problems between Israel and Palestine is a lack of dialogue, an absence of dialogue, no interaction between the populations, and an absence of goodwill in politics. I think that relations do pretty much work at the level of civil society. You know, you have wonderful people who do get on, who do understand each other. And I think that they can perfectly well embody the vision described by Emer Costello in his book, namely, with you have an Israeli Jew and you have a Palestinian Arab who can sit down and have a cup of coffee together. That is, I think, the vision, that is the perspective. Now, Israel's policy, its ramifications are serious, because in a way Israel doesn't want to yield, but we need to look towards the future. They need to look towards the future. We're not just talking about the tomorrow as a day, we're talking about the day after tomorrow, and in Israeli politics you don't seem to have that vision right now. The President. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Landsbergis.
President, while following in years not only the tragic events on the spot but also the debates of politicians, debates from a distance, and very often rather abstract. The formulas and wording is used which concerns me, and I wish to ask, when so many talks are about Palestinians and about Palestine, about what Palestine we are talking and about what Palestinians? They are at least even geographically two Palestines now, with two ruling, representing forces or personalities. If they are legitimately or authorized to represent the parts of Palestinian people, and who is representing Palestinian refugees. Maybe it is a time to sit at the table and to get an evaluation, to not play words. Palestine is recognized, Palestine so and so. What Palestine? Hamas Palestine? Abbas Palestine? Is Hamas Palestine recognizing Abbas as a legitimate president? Let us take the issue in a real light. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I call Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, President. The representative of the High Representative informed us that the message from the EU has never been clearer. But let's look at what the message from the majority in this Parliament and from what the European Council actually is. It's only 2 months since this Parliament voted to upgrade trade relations with Israel. Tomorrow it will pass a resolution criticising some of Israel's actions. The clear message seems to me to be the same as always to the Israeli government: don't worry, will criticise you in words but will never actually do anything about it. It's simply not good enough. There should be an immediate suspension of all EU-Israel agreements. With the building of these settlements surrounding East Jerusalem, you have an attempt in reality to destroy any possibility of a viable Palestinian state. You see a picture of what the two-state solution on the basis of the continuation of the rule of imperialism and capitalism means. It means Bantustans for the Palestinians. It underlines the need for a new mass popular struggle from below, the redevelopment of an intifada of the Palestinian people under democratic control, fighting to defeat the right-wing Israeli establishment and linking up with Israeli workers and poor. Only on that basis can the national oppression of the Palestinians be ended and a really just solution be found, with a socialist Palestine with a capital in East Jerusalem alongside a socialist Israel.
Thank you very much. Mr. Van Dalen is the next speaker on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Much has been said today, but let us be honest. From the day of its existence, the State of Israel has been confronted with terror and war. War Israel didn't seek itself. And today, Hamas in the south, in the Gaza Strip, but also Hezbollah in the north, are in the act of terrorism. That is not good for the Palestinians. That's bad for the Palestinians. But what can Israel do but react? I don't believe that extra settlements are the right conclusion, the right reaction. But what we should do is say to Hamas, as European Parliament, stop this terror now. Recognize Israel and sit at a table together with your Palestinian Authority. Stop now. That we should say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you. And now, I would like to call Mrs. Savella.
Ευχαριστώ, κύριε Πρόεδρε.
Thank you, President. Let me remind to all that the new settlements are not built on new grounds. Actually, this had been agreed previously on the territories which had been agreed under President Clinton. So this is not new at all. It's not illegal. Let me address this Parliament. We should address calmly the political response of Israel. Israel, with this move, wishes to remind to the Palestinians that dialogue is ongoing, should be ongoing, actually, and I would say to all here, we'd better deal and be concerned more about the dispute between Fatah and Hamas. In this way, we might understand why Israel is responding this way. Israel is sending the message that dialogue is still alive and should continue.
Mr. Migalski, you have the floor.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący, za tę możliwość.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this possibility to take the floor. Mr. Murphy is leaving, yet he provoked me to this statement because I know him as being very engaged in the issues of Kazakhstan. I appreciate this activity, although I don't share his ideology. I know you are engaged in issues of violations of human rights in Asia, but why is the EU so anti-Israeli? This phenomenon can be observed for quite a long time now, that Europe is most anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish on the left-wing side. Why all the bad things in the Middle East are being blamed upon Israel? So the criticism from the left is unequally meted out.
Mr. Brok, you have the floor.
Ich bin provoziert worden.
I'm sorry, I've just really felt provoked by the comments from the left, from the far left. It's clear that we want to go back to the 1976 agreements, a two-state agreement, and we want to have a safe state of Israel and a state of Palestine that can survive. Rapid negotiations need to take place. The EU needs to take part in these negotiations. But that the only solution is a socialist Palestine, and that's the only solution when Hamas has asked for Israel to be wiped off the face of this earth, and that is that the type of socialism that people are simply going to be forced to leave? I mean, you should stop with that communist hatred against anything that is not socialist, because I think this is the very start of the violations of human rights from the extreme left, just as it is from the extreme right.
Point of order, yes. But it must be a point of order.
Αντιλαμβάνομαι ότι ο κύριος Μπροκ
Mr. Brok and some others here have lost control. They forget about reality, the harsh reality experienced on a daily basis by the Palestinian people. The murderous attacks by Israel and genocide against Palestinians is a fact of life.
Τελειώνω. Εμείς έχουμε ξεκάθαρη θέση.
Our position is clear. In the Middle East, both people can survive, live together as fully independent states. Let's stop with populist propaganda.
Please finish. Dear colleagues, until now the debate was quite on the topic, and I think we just have arrived to the end. And I ask the Council to summarize the support and some critical remarks.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the conclusions of the Foreign Affairs Council of last Monday are very clear, very firm, and very unequivocal. Taken together with the conclusions of last May 2012, I think they send a very strong message to all actors in the region regarding the European Union position on the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is why I'm not going to repeat what is the EU position. It is very clear, and it is in the conclusions that I have just mentioned. It is in the fundamental interest of the European Union to support peace and democracy in the entire region, and a strategic priority to see an end to this long-standing and tragic conflict, which will continue to undermine peace and security along the EU southern borders as long as it remains unresolved. There will be no sustainable peace until the Palestinians' aspirations for statehood and sovereignty, and those of Israel for security, are fulfilled through a comprehensive, negotiated peace based on the two-state solution. The European Union repeats its call on 29 November to Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas to work towards a settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with renewed purpose. Both have previously stated their willingness to enter into direct negotiations without preconditions. We urge both of them to do so, and will work with both of them, the US, including through the Quartet, and with others in the international community, in the region, to help bring about this lasting solution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Very much. Practically all the parliamentary fractions proposed a statement that will be discussed or voted tomorrow. And now the debate is over. We will vote tomorrow noon.
The next item on our agenda is once again on behalf of the Vice President of the Commission and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. It's a statement on Ukraine. And on behalf of the High Representative, I would like to call the Commissioner, Mr. Füle.
Thank you, Mr. President and honourable members, Madam Minister. There are many challenges on Ukraine's road towards political association and economic integration with the European Union. We remain firmly engaged to developing relations with Ukraine, no doubt about that. But we cannot realise the full potential of our relations yet. At the December Foreign Affairs Council 2 days ago, the Council adopted conclusions on Ukraine which confirmed a sequenced policy of engagement. High Representative and Vice President Ashton called Ukrainian Prime Minister Azarov yesterday to explain these conclusions. The point she made was about a clear message to Ukraine on the elements for the way ahead, on what needs to be done and on what is at stake. The conclusions set out a number of concrete benchmarks. These will be the basis upon which the European Union will assess Ukraine's progress in the 3 areas already defined as necessary for opening the way for the signature of the Association Agreement. Let me underline that we are not imposing additional hurdles. But at the same time, we are not compromising on our values. I mentioned the 3 areas where we expect progress from Ukraine. The first of these was the compliance of the 2012 parliamentary elections with international standards and follow-up actions to remedy any shortcomings. The second was Ukraine's progress in addressing the issue of selective justice and preventing its recurrence. And the third was action to implement the reforms defined in the jointly agreed association agenda. Let me say a few words about how the European Union sees developments in these 3 areas. As regards the recent parliamentary elections, and elections being the first criteria, the European Union notes with concern that they presented a mixed picture and a deterioration in several areas compared to standards previously achieved. Looking to the final report by the OSCE ODIHR, it is essential that Ukraine takes early action to fully implement its recommendations and to address the shortcomings. The European Union has taken good note of the public